Alright, welcome to my very first-person gameplay commentary of a game of Guild Ball. I'll be playing Alchemists here, captained by Midas, playing against John, a guy I met at the shop down in Oak Park, who is playing what I want to say was originally Ballista, but I think last second he changes to Pin Vice. So we're here in deployment. Terrain is set up. We have two forests located top right of the screen, middle of the screen. The other three pieces of terrain are all marked as impassable. I select my roster as Midas, Vitriol, Catalyst 1, Compound, Venom, and Flask. My plot cards end up being Wingback, Sick'em, and then the only plot card I end up playing throughout the entire game is the one where you get your heroic back. I believe it's Heroic Landing, which is a great Deadpool reference. Anyway, so we're just deploying up here. I deploy Venom on the right to with the intention of having him kick. He counter deploys me, having Colossus on the top, and then just off screen to the right is Salvo. I managed to find this nice little nook and piece of terrain that I can tuck my ball into, so that no matter how it scatters, I can just kind of put it wherever, or it just really won't move, rather. So that plan turns out to be successful. We move on to allocation. Here I put 4 on Venom in hopes that I will force Salvo to go early, or force one of his players to come up, or just get the ball early. And if Salvo goes early, he's probably not doing very much with his character plays, and I can kind of go throughout the turn without taking too much damage. And Venom's fairly one of the better protected players on the team, as he has 4 defense compared to like the largely 3 defense with the rest of the players. Alright, so he moves up. He's with his Salvo. He snaps the ball to himself using Tether, which is a lot better than I initially thought it was. I originally thought you had to roll to hit the ball, but because the ball's not an enemy model, you just spend the 2 influence, and the ball snaps to him. He then passes to Veteran Velocity, generating himself momentum. Moving on from there, I go with my Flask, seeing that the Venom play, he can't get to anybody. I drop the Cloud next to Vitriol, and I slide Flask over, being careful to leave him still in the cloud. Should something get to me, I could still benefit from having cover. He then goes with his Ratchet. Ratchet just jogs forward, then discards his influence. He doesn't really spend it on anything. Then I move with my Compound. I just jog with him, and I make sure to keep him within 4 of the goal, just to make sure I can keep Rush Keeper available. Although I think now is a good time to talk about the fact that I think Rush Keeper is a little bit of a trap, because a lot of people don't take the use of a model that has reach in Alchemists, which is a big weakness of ours. Compound can do a lot of work in the midfield too, but most people keep him chained to the back goalpost. Now, I think in this matchup it was correct for me to keep him back there most of the game, because Engineers aren't going to beat my Alchemists to death. They're going to outscore me with their 4-6 kicks all over the place, so I need him back there protecting my goal. He then moves up with his Pin Vice, and just discards her influence as well, doesn't really do anything with it. So from here I decide to just move up with my Vitriol. I think a bit about putting her into the forest, but I don't really want to lock myself into that -2/-2 move on my next turn, because I don't really know what the end board state's going to look like. And I realize that I can just spend my 1 to keep her in cover, and I kind of get the best of both worlds. He then moves Manspring up, and my eyes just light up, because Manspring is just like Flask in that he explodes when he dies, and he has his team kind of grouped up there. I think Venom can get in and do that. Problem here is I can't then guarantee I go first, because Venom's damage is pretty much exclusively non-momentous. So I decide to charge with Venom. I can go in on Manspring. I sit there and I measure it, and I want to make sure that I'm outside of Pin Vice's range, but in there. And so I pick where I'm going to land, and then he declares a counterattack. And now, normally you have to declare a counterattack, and actually, when I say normally, you just always have to declare a counterattack before the model moves, but this is only my second game of Season 3. He's still a fairly new player, and I let him do it, and I decide whether I want to change where I end up landing. I decide not to change where I landed, I just go with it, realizing at this point that he actually can't hurt me. He's Tac 2. I put up my defensive ability with Venom, and so even if he rolls both hits, they bounce off. I roll my dice and I wrap, getting a sack puppet and 2 damage as my result, so I collect my 1 momentum. Manspring takes his poison, and I move on to his counterattack, which he rolls, then realizing I have 2 armor, that no matter what he rolls, he's going to bounce off. I then move on to get 2 damage with my next attack, followed by another 1 damage. I then realize, now that I'm out of influence, that Manspring will die to poison here, and with Sack Puppet up on Manspring, Venom is borderline invincible, because if he damages Venom at all, Manspring could potentially die if he does more than 1 damage. And it forces him to spend 2 of his momentum to clear Manspring, or Manspring will explode and damage all his models. So, I'm fairly confident of that. And I'm so certain, in fact, that he is going to clear Manspring that I actually go in on Pinvice with Midas. In order to get there, I have to use my Heroic to dodge closer, and I have to sprint, because there's a forest in the way. Now, Midas doesn't really care about the forest largely because of light-footed, but it still blocks line of sight for him, so I can't charge her, and I do effectively have to spend that momentum to just get as close as I can to her. I move up, I declare my attack, she declares a counterattack. When I roll mine, it's not great, I only have 2 hits. The plan initially here is to build a bunch of momentum and push Dodger out, but new Midas doesn't have momentous push dodge on 2. Instead, his momentous push dodge is on 3, and it comes with a damage. Our hope here is that we're going to build momentum, and we're going to drag her out, but leave her in range of Manspring, but get Midas clear. And because he declares a counterattack, I dodge in so that I can't be pushed away, because I can't just spend a momentum to dodge back in, because I've already heroiced. He then takes his counterattack and completely whiffs it. I'm 5-1. It's a rough stat line to try to fight against. I roll my next attack. I get my push dodge, non-momentous, to drag her closer. Then I buy my next attack, and I completely whiff and sit there and complain about how oppressive 5-0 defense is when I have a captain who has the exact same stat line but also has an armor. My next attack goes, and again, it's just not great. I have only 2 successes, and realizing that I can't get out of range of Manspring's explosion, I just take the momentum instead of trying to continue to pull Pinvice out of position. John next activates Colossus. He jogs up the pitch with him a bit, and then he decides, after a little bit of deliberation, that he's just going to pass back to Velocity. But unfortunately, despite the 4 kick dice, he misses the kick, and the ball scatters, but Ratchet is able to intercept it. Catalyst has no one in range, so I decide that I'm just going to sprint up with them, knowing that on the sizable momentum lead I have, I pretty much have the next turn guaranteed. Maintenance phase occurs. Manspring dies to poison, dealing damage to Venom, Pinvice, Ratchet, and Midas, lighting them all on fire as well. I decide to allocate 6 to Midas, 4 to Catalyst, and 3 on Vitriol. The thought here is that Midas and Catalyst will be able to beat Pinvice to death, and hopefully we'll also be able to get Midas after Ratchet to get a goal. Vitriol's there for snapback prevention, because a lot of times when you score a goal this early in a turn, you will immediately get scored on again. So I have my best striker, or my longest reaching striker, in the back, hoping that she can prevent another goal being scored. John chooses during his phase not to bring Manspring on, suspecting likely that he will bring him back on with Ratchet later in the turn. Allocates 2 to Salvo, 4 to Ratchet, 2 to Pinvice, 2 to Velocity, and 2 to Colossus. This tells me that he's going to be playing a lot of the ball coming up, and I have other plans, so hopefully I can kind of prevent that. I deliberate between whether I want to go with Midas or Catalyst first, and I'm afraid that if I go with Midas first, I'm fairly confident he can get the goal, but then I think just Pinvice is just going to leave, and I'm not going to be able to do anything with Catalyst's influence. So I decided to go with Catalyst first. I charge with him, and then as he gets in and I go and I look at my dice to see how many calculate, I realize that we have forgotten how to use new Catalyst. and I have never put him on fire. So we fixed that. I put the fire on him. He takes the 1 damage that he should have taken in the last maintenance phase. Pinvice declares that she's going to do a counterattack. So I roll up my dice, and my roll's not great, but it's good enough because knockdown on 2 is absolutely fantastic on anybody with 8 tack. And so we knock her down. She can't counterattack me. So I make my next attack, and it comes up big money. I get 6 hits. Consider doing external combustion, but pushing her into Colossus over there doesn't really seem like that good of an idea. I really want to push her into Ratchet and Velocity so that we can really limit how far Velocity can go and really just make him spend more momentum. So I end up taking double push 2 damage. And then we roll again, and we do get to external combustion. So we external combustion her, dealing 3 damage to her, pushing her back into Ratchet and Velocity, putting them all on fire. Ratchet activates next, using his character trait Fixer to pull the conditions off of Pinvice. He decides that he's going to use Blast Earth to put a ring on Midas, and we look at it and it realizes that my positioning is not real great. They're in a big morass. So he catches Midas, Catalyst, and Venom with it, hits them all, deals 2 damage to each one, and drops a little pile of rough ground. Kicks the ball to Colossus, sprints up the pitch a bit, then ends his activation. I activate Midas next, charging Pinvice, my first attack result. We do a Momentous 2. Then we attack again, doing Momentous 1 push dodge. Third attack, we miss completely, which is really unfortunate because we lose the guaranteed kill on Pinvice. Then we go ahead and swing again, and it's another terrible roll. I take the first column result, I do 1 damage. Then we buy and realize that we could have been using bonus time this entire time, so I buy with bonus time, and I get a Momentous 1 push dodge, which leaves Pinvice at just 1 health. Midas is out of influence, so we heroic with Midas. We don't really go anywhere with him. We're just doing it because we have the plot card in hand, which we reveal to gain the momentum right back, and for that extra armor, that little bit of survivability, we're way up the pitch with Midas. We then spend momentum to heal Midas, and we end his activation. John activates Pinvice next. He starts off by using Alternator on both Colossus and Vet Velocity. Alternator is the one that gives +2/+2 move, and then they take 2 damage at the end of their activation. He then, for some inexplicable reason, walks Pinvice away from Midas, taking a free strike, giving me essentially a free kill on Pinvice with no influence cost whatsoever. So I look at the table and I'm not quite sure what to do. So I do what I do in a lot of minis games that are alternating activations. I just take a delaying activation. I move Flask up, I place the Cloud on Vitriol. This gives Vitriol a lot more flexibility about where she can go and whether she has to sprint. And I pass the turn back to him. John activates Veteran Velocity. He chooses to sprint with her. She's -2 speed because she's on fire, but +2 speed from Alternator. They effectively wash, and he sprints her up 8. He spends an influence for aggressive defense, and thinks for a little bit, and decides not to use the last influence on her, and then takes 2 from Pinvice's Alternator buff. I go ahead and I activate Vitriol. I jog up with Vitriol. I take a swing at Colossus, using the tackle result on 1 of Vitriol to proc close control. I bonus time my next attack, selecting tackle again to get the ball off him. I then choose to pass to Midas. Pass to Midas is successful. I go for the snapshot on Midas, using showboating to reduce its cost by 1. Midas doesn't have super shot up, so he's only a 3/8 kick, so I decide to go ahead and go for the bonus time, looking for 2 4s on 4 dice. We roll it out, we get it, and we pass the turn right back over to him. We don't even think about taking Run the Length, because I know I want to leave Midas well within range for maybe another snapshot if we get lucky enough that he hands us the ball back. John resolves his goal kick and tries to kick it over to Colossus. It scatters to within 2 inches of him, and Colossus is able to pick it up due to that extra inch from long legs. He then declares an attack on Vitriol, gets his Momentous knockdown and push, jogs down the field, and he's able to make it there with just jog because he has the +2/+2 from Alternator. Kicks the ball over to Vet Velocity. The pass ends up being successful. and then Colossus takes his 2 from Pinvice's alternator. I then activate Venom. I shake conditions with Venom first, and I'm looking to do as much work with him as possible, despite the fact that he's just a battery and doesn't generate an influence, and the best way to do that is to put poison in annoying places. So I jog him up, and I engage Manspring, so when Manspring activates, he'll take poison. John then activates Salvo, jogs him up to the cover, uses Flurry to hit Venom, and again I'm punished for this very tight grouping of Catalyst, Midas, and Manspring. He hits, splashing 2 damage on each of them. I move on to activate Compound. I just kind of shuffle him over to the left, so that way he can kind of project threat of the countercharge onto Veteran Catalyst and Colossus. Manspring activates next, taking poison for being in Venom's melee range, and then without any influence on him, just ends his activation. This ends the turn. I'm leading in momentum 1-0, but unfortunately John wins the roll to go first. He jogs Pinvice back onto the pitch. He moves on to allocating. He puts 4 on Colossus, 2 on Salvo, 2 on Ratchet, 2 on Vet Velocity, 3 on Pinvice. We move on to my allocation. I put 1 on Compound, thinking maybe he'll need to go get the ball after John scores a goal. I put 2 on Flask, looking for an Intensify charge since we have lots of conditions well within his reach. Put none on Venom because Venom's my battery and he just kind of hangs out and produces 2 for me. I put 4 on Catalyst, 4 on Midas, and 3 on Vitriol. Colossus jogs up and swings on Compound. Compound declares a counterattack. Colossus pops Glut Mass with his first attack. Colossus makes his counterattack and manages to only get a push, which pushes him into a crowd out with Flask. Colossus, with his second attack, scores a momentous knockdown push and pushes Compound back a little bit. Clears his third attack, gets singled out as his result, and then Colossus, with his final attack, between having 2 extra dice from the singled out result, as well as Compound being knocked down, he's able to score 5 hits for Unexpected Arrival, pushing both Flask and Compound back. I activate Vitriol. The first thing I do is I sacrifice my movement to stand up, and then I'm looking here at getting the ball back. And I ask about if this is Veteran Velocity, if she still has close control, if she maintained it to her second iteration and she didn't, which kind of makes me question why that is a good model. So thinking about the math really quick, I realize that I just want 1 attack to be as reliable as possible because I just have to hit her once and I can get that tackle on Vitriol's tackle on 1. So I put us both in a cloud, spending that 1 influence, and then I take the swing. I'm down a dice because I'm engaged by Ratchet, but I'm up a dice for being in cover. So I take my swing, I get my 1 success, I tackle the ball from Vet Velocity, and I move on to kick it to Midas. I'm 4-8, but I'm down 1 because I'm engaged by Ratchet again. Kick it, the kick is successful, no problem, and then I use Midas's Showboating to take him closer to the goal and out of range of any kind of shenanigans coming from Pinvice. John activates Salvo and decides he's going to do everything he can to stop Midas from scoring, and with Unpredictable, really his only option is to use Arrow to the Knee on Midas, which he hits, dealing 2 damage and giving Midas a -2/-2 kick. Salvo then takes a 1-inch dodge towards the cover from his ability Swift Strikes. I activate Midas. I know the plan here is to score a goal, but first I need to generate momentum because I want Midas to also have his heroic up and not just take the shot and end his activation and lose all this influence. So the plan is we're going to build some momentum off of Manspring. We start off by heroicing into Manspring to get our 2-inch dodge and get that 1 armor up. I declare an attack with Midas. Manspring counterattacks. And even with my 1 extra dice from the gang up with Venom, I completely whiff the attack. And now I'm starting to sweat here because Manspring's about to take his counterattack, and if he hits double 5s, which isn't super likely, but if he does hit double 5s, he can tackle the ball and really make this goal difficult for me because Midas's tackle is non-momentous. Thankfully, Manspring misses his counterattack and doesn't roll double 5s. So I move on to my next attack. I get 2 hits, but because I really need a momentum in order to be able to make this shot, I take the momentous dodge on 1. and dodge out of combat with Manspring. Now Midas still has the Air to the Knee debuff on him, and so I use Super Shot to bring him up to a 2-8 kick. I take a 2 dice shot on goal and roll double threes. And I'm just devastated. I was like, this is such a guaranteed thing. It's super easy. We go on to resolve the kick scatter, and then we remember that the new tap in all the time rule, I actually scored on the threes. This brings the score to 11-0. John then concedes not wanting to play out the rest of the game because Manspring is sitting there on 1 or 2 health, and he just shakes my hand and we call it there. That wraps up my first Guild Ball gameplay commentary. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. In the comments below, tell me whether you enjoyed this gameplay commentary and what other kind of content you'd like to see me make in the future.